On this episode, more resilient bioretention brought to you by trees and turf. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro, and to episode 8 in this no longer at all miniature series about trees in bioretention systems. Now this episode is all about an idea for how we might be able to use trees in bioretention to, as usual, reduce maintenance costs. Now this isn't just my idea, although certainly I've been thinking about it quite a bit and therefore I'm quite excited to share it with you. It's not just my idea, this idea has developed up after conversations with some people at Brisbane City Council, after conversations with Ben, who you see regularly and who films regularly for me, after conversations with a few people who, and this will make sense in a minute, have designed bioretention systems with grass in them. And so this idea is, how can we use grass and trees in a bioretention system to make them more resilient and less of a challenge for maintenance? So, for this to make sense, we need to define a very real problem. Now, this is particularly real for any local government that doesn't have a particularly good budget for maintaining stormwater treatment assets, but it's real just even if you do have a good budget. Unless you have really slick handover processes from the developer who constructs the asset to the maintenance team who looks after it, unless you have really slick handover processes, this can still be a challenge. And the challenge is how quickly after handover, where the developer stops actually doing anything to maintain the system, they don't just stop doing anything in general and keel over, how long after handover, where the developer stops actually doing anything maintenance-wise, does the asset management person find out about the asset and then actually have the ability to start works on it to look after it? And there could be several things in here. It could be that there's a delay in the council process of the information getting to the asset maintenance person, or it could be that they're budget constrained. Maybe if that system's handed over like in, financial years in Australia end at June 30, so run July 1 to June 30. You know, if you were handed the asset at the end of May, let's say the beginning of May, you might find that your budget was already pretty low at that point and you might just be kind of, juggling everything together, particularly in Queensland. That's winter. That's when things are a little bit less vigorous on the weed side. So you've probably expended the vast majority of your maintenance budget over summer when there's more risk to these systems. And so we get to that point, the asset is handed over and there could very well be a delay before the maintenance person can get out and do any works on it. Best case scenario, it gets handed over straight away. Really likely case scenario, there could be a couple of month delay here. Entirely plausible scenario, there is a year's delay, 2 years delay, particularly if there's no well-funded maintenance program set up. The point here being, that's a real risk because in that period, we all know that maintaining bioretention systems, the fundamental is do a little bit of weed control regularly. The problem here is that if there is a gap in that handover process and the asset's still pretty young at that stage, like the developer, even if they've done a good job, got the plants quite well established, they're still not at maturity because the system might be like 2 years old at that point. They're still not at maturity. They are still at risk of weeds getting up, competing with them. And that's a problem for the maintenance person. If you don't get it, after handover when the developer stops managing the weeds, if you're not able to get in there straight away, by the time you can, in either 2 months or 6 months or 12 months, depending on where this is, this system could be in either moderately bad nick or really bad nick. So, how could trees and grass as a planting mix in bioretention systems help with this? Well, the problem that we have in this situation is there's the gap, the weeds get established. If it's a standard bioretention system with, say, emergent plants like lomandras and caryxes and juncuses, the problem is that the weeds can grow up above them, over them, shade them out, smother them out, outcompete them, and you lose those plants. Well, best case scenario, you have a lot of very manual weeding that you need to do to get those weeds out without damaging the plants with accidental overspray, for example. Worst case scenario though, the weeds have already outcompeted the plants and removing the weeds kills the system. So imagine a scenario where instead of being planted with these, tufted species like the lomandras, like the caryxes, the juncuses, imagine the bioretention system was planted with trees at appropriate spacings, trees and turf. Now the trees, I'm not imagining them as tube stock in this scenario. I'm imagining they might have gone in like 45 litre pots or something large enough that they're really obviously seen, and also bigger than any weed is likely to get in a quick period of time unless it's a super vicious climber. What I'm thinking of here is this gives us two potential benefits if you're the maintenance person. The first one is that if you can't get in there and do weed management straight away, the weeds, they're going to come up through the turf, right? But when you do get there in 2 months or 6 months, your job is no longer picking in and about the lomandras and the caraxes to get rid of those weeds so you don't accidentally kill everything with overspray. Your job is now mow the turf and just mow all the weeds back off. And now it's not going to give you the nicest lawn at the end, but we're talking about a bioretention system purely for treatment purposes here. No one's going to be running around in it. So you just mow off the weeds at the end of that, and then you're left with a system that's turfy with kind of weed stumps, and you've still got your trees growing in it. Well, that's better, that's easier, and your system's your system's functional at that point. Maintenance benefit number 2 here has, for one small moment, slipped my mind. Never mind, we'll come back to that, hopefully. It came back to me. Don't you like how slick these episodes are? Maintenance benefit number 2 is exactly this. Mowing a bioretention system is cheaper than doing either manual weed pulling or even spraying herbicide around in a controlled manner, and making sure you don't have overspray problems and all the other problems associated with herbicide use. Mowing system is just cheaper, so there's far more chance that the 2-month delay doesn't happen for budgetary reasons. It could happen if the process of the asset maintenance person finding out about the asset isn't good, so it could still happen for that reason. But if it's a budgetary problem, such as, oops, this asset's been handed over in early May and we really don't have very much budget left, that's less of a problem then, because mowing is so cheap that there's a much greater chance you'll be able to just sneak it in somewhere and just keep a bit of an eye on it at that point. So 2 benefits from this. So what I'm seeing here is a bioretention system that is, now you still need to do all the usual protection from sediment during house building sites. So how this would work in my mind, I'm imagining this for bioretention systems of a few hundred square meters or so. You could also, however, I could see this working for streetscape systems. But what I'm imagining here, as I talk this through, is I'm imagining this for like what I would term a precinct scale bioretention system. And so it would go like this. The developer would construct all the civil aspects, the inlets, the outlets, the pipes, lay the filter media. They would protect it using geofabric and turf. They would protect it from sediment from the house building sites. The house building would occur, just like happens with every other bioretention system delivered by a developer. The house building would occur. When it is over, the developer would come through and remove the turf and the geofabric because it's accumulated all this sediment. We don't want it on there. Then fresh turf would be laid. Hold that thought for a second. I'll come back to fresh turf being laid. And the trees as 45s planted through it. Now, they would need to be planted at really careful spacings to actually allow a mower to get in and amongst them. If you planted them too close, then the mower's not going to be able to get in and amongst them, and suddenly someone has to hand mow this, which I could imagine being a bit of a pain in the backside. So, it's got to be big enough for a ride-on to get in and around the spacing between the trees. The centres between the trees has to be big enough for a ride-on to get in and amongst it. That might mean that the density of trees is a little bit low compared to a system like Hoyland Street that we were at in some of the earlier videos in this series. But nonetheless, I think you've got potential that over time, so the initial management here is that mowing of the grass in amongst the system as the trees grow up. Now over time the trees are going to get taller and taller and taller, and they're going to establish. And at some point you're going to have a relatively well-formed canopy. And a couple of things could happen at this point. One, the turf might not like the shade and it might start to die out at that point of time. Or two, turf might do just okay because the trees might be so far apart, and this all depends on species, right? So you need to think this through in your particular application. the trees might be so far apart and have not particularly dense canopies that lots of light might get through anyway and the turf might do just fine. But the point is that at that point in time, you actually have a choice that you can make, because you could, depending on where you want the system to end up in the long run, then choose to plant it out with an understory and turn it into something like the Hoyland Street system. Or you might want to leave it in this kind of turfed fashion that we're talking about here. That's up to you. That's not really the point of this video, to try and articulate when you might or might not do that. The point of this video is to go, here's something that could help with the handover process. Before we go, let's just briefly touch on, so come back, I told you to hold a thought about, two thoughts we need to hold, that we need to come back to here actually. So the first of them, I told you to hold a thought about laying turf in the system. The thought that I was just thinking that I just wanted to touch on briefly is that turf really regularly, like standard turf that you buy in like a roll or in a pallet, comes with the dirt attached on the roots. Now, that to me seems a little bit problematic when we want a really freely draining bioretention system. Just rolling out turf on top of a system, yeah, you know what? I don't think that's the greatest idea. I'm sorry to say, but this idea, I think you're going to need to wash all the dirt off the roots of the turf. You're going to need to lay it bare rooted on top of the filter media, so we're not adding all that sediment on top and risking blocking up the system. And then you're going to need to irrigate it, I believe, in order to make sure it establishes, because frankly, washing all the dirt off the turf's roots is going to shock it really badly. It's going to be really at risk of just shriveling up and dying. So you're going to need to water it to get it established, let it get its roots down into the filter media, get itself nice and happy, and then back off that. So that was thought number one to hold. Thought number two is, I imagine many of you have gone, wait, you can put turf in bioretention systems and it treats stormwater? For a long period of time, and if you were to go and look at, for example, the Healthy Waterways, Water Sensitive Urban Design Technical Design Guidelines for South East Queensland, June 2006, and find the bioretention chapter that has since been superseded. But if you were to dig that out and look in the back, you might find, you know what, maybe that one doesn't. Maybe that was an inappropriate reference. The point is, there was a perception for a long period of time that turf in bioretention systems was inappropriate for a couple of reasons. Its root structure wasn't well enough developed to keep the filter media porous and open, and its root structure wasn't really well enough developed to do good treatment of nutrients, particularly like nitrogen, in the system. And so turf was then not recommended for use. I think the Worcester TDG didn't recommend it, but as I was saying that, I was beginning to doubt myself. The point is, it was well established in the industry that you didn't put turf as a long-term treatment species in bioretention systems. And that is why I'm sure many of you have thought that as you're watching this video. However, in more recent years, Monash Uni's done some research that shows at least some species of turf can do really quite well as a treatment measure in bioretention systems. And equally, the research that initially, some of these initial thoughts, even if it's not the only species we're putting in here, right? Because first up, we're putting trees in, which have a different type of root structure. Trees such as melaleucas, which is what I've kind of had in my mind the whole time in this discussion. Trees such as melaleucas are renowned for being able to break up the filter media and keep it draining. So you actually need to look at the picture of both the turf that's being put in that's doing certain functional things, and the trees that are being put in that have different root structures and do different functional things, and what is the combined package of those, and can they together deliver? And I think they can, because the turf brings ease of maintenance, and potentially with the right species and the right root structure, decent treatment performance and decent filter media conductivity. And the trees, in this case Melaleuca, they bring definitely good treatment performance, that's proven. They bring good hydraulic conductivity in the filter media, that's proven. Put it together, we've got a pretty robust system in my mind. Also, then we've got this option in the long run to see the turf succeeded by other plants within the system. And so that's it. That is this idea. It is by no means proven. This is once again one of those things where I'm talking about a potential idea that you could try out. You would need to apply your own nous, your own thinking to this and go, okay, what is my application? Does this make sense? And how do I apply this idea and flesh it out and develop it more fully. If you want to know more about, well, trees in bioretention systems, by all means, go and watch the past 7 videos in this series. If you want to know more about grass in bioretention systems, a few things you can do. Firstly, I don't have the paper reference to hand, but Monash Uni has done research into grass in bioretention systems. Check that out. Number 2, video 43 in this series, we looked at some of Manningham City Council's ZAM WUSD systems, that's zero additional maintenance, water sensitive urban design systems. They are bioretention systems with grass in them. And number 3, there are now a few bioretention systems with turf in them around the place. There are some at Pelican Waters on the Sunshine Coast in southeast Queensland, where I am right now. I could not remember where I was. There are some in Pelican Waters in southeast Queensland. You could go take a look at those. They are on the WUSD map. If you haven't heard what the WUSD map is, it is essentially a map with a whole bunch of stormwatery and WUSD places located on it. You can find the WUSD map at www.ideanthro.com/the-WUSD-map. Okay, that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the idea. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.